Well, hello, engineering students. I want to share with you a cleaner version of how to do the spreadsheet calculation by inserting a formula as we were trying to calculate using the distance formula. So right here on my screen, you will see the correct distance formula. There was a typo in the one that I shared with you today, but it still worked because x1 and y1 were 0. But this is the actual correct formula. There's only a square after the difference of the x's and there's a square after the difference of the y's. So I've cleaned up the instructions on this and I'll share it with all the classes. So if we go to the Excel spreadsheet here, this is the correct formula taken out of your actual assignment. And so the version that it'll look like when you type it into a computerized system like this will be SQRT, which will be the square root. X2, X1 will look the same, Y2, Y1 will look the same, and we're only squaring outside of the parentheses here. The caret symbol, which is the upward looking arrow, that's called a caret, C-A-R-A-T, and it's found by doing Shift 6 on your keyboard will get you the caret symbol. So this reads as the square root of x2 minus x1 squared plus y2 minus y1 squared, which we know as the distance formula. So we had our spreadsheet created this way where I added the origin up here at the top. I added a label for origin, a label for x1, and a label for y1. And then I just put the number 0 here and the number 0 here because all of our distances are being measured from the origin. So my x1 and my y1 never change. They remain 0 all the time. So we're going to always refer back to those two numbers for our x1 and y1. The numbers that are changing are the x2 and the y2. So these are the coordinates that you actually recorded from off of your target, where you tossed your beanbag and got your target, and then you took a ruler and measured the distance. So what we want to do in this session is we want to add the distance formula to the spreadsheet, because remember, a spreadsheet can hold three things. It can hold a label, it can hold a number, and it can hold a formula. And the formula is what makes it really powerful. So remember, to start a formula, you want to start with the equal sign. And then built into the spreadsheet is actual mathematical functions. And there's a mathematical function called square root. And the abbreviation for that is SQRT. So I'm going to go capital letter, and I'm going to do SQRT. And you notice as I type it in, it actually shows up as one of the functions here in the spreadsheet. So that's square root, and anytime you have a mathematical function, you have to have a parenthesis to contain what that's going to operate on. So we're going to do an open parenthesis, and then I'm just going to type it just like it is over here pretty much, except I'm going to go grab where these values are. So I open the parenthesis with my square root. I've got to open another parenthesis now to get the x values in. So I'm going to open a second parenthesis. I'm going to go get the value for x2. Now the value for x2 is over here at cell B5. That's where the value is. That's the label. The value is 2.5. So I'm going to click on that, and it automatically will pick up cell B5, which is where X2 is located. I want to subtract from that the value for X1. Well, X1 value is up here at G2. Now, since I'm going to be copying this formula all the way down my list, I don't want G2 to change. I want the formula to always go back and look in cell G2 for the X1 value. So I'm going to make this what's called an absolute coordinate where it doesn't change. I'm going to type a $sign in front of the G, and I'm going to type a $sign in front of the 2, and that will freeze that cell and make it always go to G2. The $sign, of course, is above your 4 on your keyboard. And then I'm going to close that parenthesis, because just like over here, x2 minus x1 is inside parentheses. And then I need to raise that parenthesis, that difference, to the second power. So I'm going to do, on the keyboard above the 6, you'll see the caret symbol. So I'm going to do Shift 6 and do caret. And I'm going to do 2, which means I want to square that value. I want to take that difference and square it. Then I'm going to add to that the set of the y values here, the y differences. So I'm going to open another parentheses. I'm going to go get the value for Y2. Now the value for Y2 is over here under in cell C5. So I click on C5. It grabs that cell value, and then I want to subtract from that the value for Y1. Well, the value for Y1 is up here as 0. It's H2. So I click on H2, and it highlights it. But again, with the same condition here, I always want the formula to go back to cell H2 to find the value for Y1 because Y1 never changes in our problem. So I'm going to put a dollar sign in front of H. I'm going to put a dollar sign in front of 2. And then I'm going to close that parentheses. And then I'm going to square that difference. So caret 2. Now, you notice the parentheses around the x values turn red and the parentheses around the y values turn red because they're paired up. But we also need to close off this open parenthesis for the square root so it knows that all of this is within the square root function. So I'm going to close the square root, and you notice it sort of lit up here briefly when I closed it, and it stays black because it's part of the function, but it's actually now contains all of this. It's now considered under the radical. It's under the square root symbol, everything between the two black parentheses. So I've got my formula typed in correctly this time. It's the same as it looks up here pretty much. And then here's the distance formula that's in your assignment. So as soon as I hit enter here, it actually goes and it grabs those values and it calculates 2.69 as my distance. And of course, it's going to be different from what I measured because when I measured with a ruler, I was measuring rounding to like the nearest quarter of an inch. So the actual mathematical calculated distance is going to be different, and we'll talk about that a little later. Now, this was big in itself because it actually did all this square rooting and subtracting and squaring for me, and that saves time in the long run. But it also, the big value of this is I can take this formula and I can copy that formula and paste it on all 20 lines. So instead of me having to type all this in a calculator again for each line, I can let the spreadsheet do the calculation for me on every line. So I'm going to highlight the 2.69, which if you look in the edit window up here, it is actually a formula and not a number, right? So escape out of that. So I'm going to grab the 2.69 cell E5, and I'm going to copy it. Now, there is a copy function up here if you wish to use that. But what I like to do, it's typical on most softwares, I'm going to do a Control C. So a Control C will copy things. And then I'm going to highlight everything on every row below that, click and drag to highlight all the other 19 rows where I want to calculate my distance. And I'm going to hit Control V. Control C, Control V. Now, one of the things you could do here is instead of doing Control V, you could come over here and choose Paste. But you got to make sure you pick the exact correct option over here if you choose Paste over here. So I just always do Control C, Control V, right? Now, what you can look at here is if I start moving down this column and looking at the formulas, I want you to watch the edit bar up here. Watch what happens as I move down each row, okay? Escape out of that to make sure it's not trying to do a formula. I'm going to move down and notice the row numbers are changing. The B9, B10, B11, C11, C12, C13. You notice all the row numbers are changing because I copied the formula to the next row. And so it automatically updated the row number to pick up these values. But notice what did not change. The G2 and the H2 did not change because I made those absolute coordinates. Using the dollar signs, I made them absolute coordinates. And so it always goes back up here to G2 and H2 to pick the X1 and the Y1 value. And I forced it to do that. So this is kind of a great little introduction to formulas being added to spreadsheets. It works the same way if you use the Google Sheets. It types in exactly the same way, the same function. And so hopefully now you'll be able to create formulas as well as labels and numbers inside the spreadsheets. And you guys will be quite successful with this. And it'll be a big help to you in engineering to actually be able to use a spreadsheet to put formulas in and have the formulas do the calculations for you.